James Alfred White, who wrote under the pen name of James Herriot, was quite simply the world's most famous veterinarian ever. Born in Sunderland, England in 1916, died in 1995, he lived a very rich and vigorous and deeply fulfilling life as a veterinarian. And at the age of 50, at the inspiration of his wife Joan, he started writing about all his memories and experiences of life in the Yorkshire Dales. He based his stories in a fictional village called Darrowby, which was actually the village of Thirsk. If you want to know all the details about him, he's a very famous man. You can simply log into his website called worldofjamesherriot.com, and you'll be regaled and enriched with a vast wealth of information. He has been one of my heroes since very early youth, and not just because he was a veterinary surgeon. He taught me so much, not only about animals and their lives and their behavior and their ways of dealing with them, but he taught me love, he taught me human sympathy and compassion and understanding. And above all, he taught me what enjoying a life can be despite all its great hardships and sorrows and losses and frustrations and betrayals and disillusionments. And so I keep going back to his wonderful books whenever I feel blue. There was a series of 4 books named after the successive lines of a very famous poem: all things bright and beautiful, all creatures great and small, all things wise and wonderful, the Lord God made them all. Those are 4 books. Besides that, he became so famous, so widely read all over the world, that there was a constant demand for more from his pen, and so he wrote several other books. The one from which I'm going to read out now is called Dog Stories. Without much more ado, let me plunge into the story itself. This particular story is called Mrs. Donovan. And Mrs. Donovan was an amateur animal doctor, and there was a time when Herriot and Mrs. Donovan were rivals. And despite her being sometimes getting on his nerves because she pretended to know much more than he did, Herriot felt a deep sympathy for her, and sometimes even a little grudging respect, because she did really care about animals, even if she didn't know very much, scientifically speaking, about them. And much of her care gave all the animals around her, especially small animals, dogs and cats, a much better life than they would have got otherwise. Now, at one time, they kept each other at arm's length, but they became much closer when he attended to her favorite old dog called Rex in his last hours after he had been run over by a car. And she was genuinely heartbroken, and she swore that she was never going to get another dog. But Herriot thought and believed and told her that she really must, she ought to do it. And see how it happened. And that is the part of the story that I'm going to read out now. I often saw Mrs. Donovan around the town after this, that is, the death of Rex, and I was glad to see she was still as active as ever, though she looked strangely incomplete without the little dog on its lead. But it must have been over a month before I had the chance to speak to her. It was on the afternoon that Inspector Halliday of the RSPCA, the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Animals, rang me. "Mr. Herriot," he said, "I would like you to come and see an animal with me, a cruelty case." "Right, what is it?" "A dog, and it's pretty grim, a dreadful case of neglect." He gave me the name of a row of old brick cottages down by the river, and said he would meet me there. Halliday was waiting for me when I arrived. He was a big blond man with cheerful blue eyes, but he didn't smile as he came over to the car. "He's in here," he said, and led the way towards one of the doors in the long, crumbling wall. A few curious people were hanging around, with a feeling of inevitability, I recognized a gnome-like brown face. Trust Mrs. Donovan, I thought, to be among those present at a time like this. We went through the door into the long garden. I had found that even the lowliest dwellings in Darrowby had long strips of land at the back. You usually found a pig there, a few hens, often pretty beds of flowers. But this garden was a wilderness. A chilling air of desolation hung over the few gnarled apple and plum trees standing among a tangle of rank grass, as though the place had been forsaken by all living creatures. Halliday went over to a ramshackle wooden shed with peeling paint and a rusted corrugated iron roof. He produced a key, unlocked the padlock, and dragged the door partly open. There was no window and it wasn't easy to see amidst the jumble inside. Broken gardening tools, an ancient mangle, rows of flower pots, and partly used paint tins. And right at the back, a dog sitting quietly. I didn't notice him immediately because of the gloom and because the smell in the shed started me coughing, but as I drew closer, I saw that he was a big animal, sitting very upright, his collar secured by a chain to a ring in the wall. I had seen some thin dogs, but this advanced emaciation reminded me of my textbooks on anatomy. Nowhere else did the bones of pelvis, face, and rib cage stand out with such horrifying clarity. A deep, smoothed-out hollow in the earth floor showed where he had lain, moved about, in fact lived for a very long time. The sight of the animal had a stupefying effect on me. I only half took in the rest of the scene, the filthy shreds of sacking scattered nearby, the bowl of scummy water. "Look at his back end," Halliday muttered. I carefully raised the dog from his sitting position and realized that the stench in the place was not entirely due to the piles of excrement. The hindquarters were a welter of pressure sores which had turned gangrenous, and strips of slowing tissue hung down from them. There were similar sores along the sternum and ribs. The coat, which seemed to be a dull yellow, was matted and caked with dirt. The inspector spoke again. "I don't think he's ever been out of here. He's only a young dog, about a year old, but I understand he has been in this shed since he was an 8-week-old pup. Somebody out in the lane heard a whimper, or he'd never have been found." I felt a tightening of the throat and a sudden nausea which wasn't due to the smell. It was the thought of this patient animal sitting starved and forgotten in the darkness and filth for a year. I looked again at the dog and saw in his eyes only a calm trust. Some dogs would have barked their heads off and soon been discovered. Some would have become terrified and vicious, but this was one of the totally undemanding kind, the kind which had complete faith in people and accepted all their actions without complaint. Just an occasional whimper perhaps, as he sat interminably in the empty blackness which had been his world, and at times wondered what it was all about. "Well, Inspector, I hope you're going to throw the book at whoever's responsible," I said. Halliday grunted. "Oh, there won't be much done. It's a case of diminished responsibility. The owner's definitely off his rocker. Lives with an aged mother who hardly knows what's going on. I have seen the fellow and it seems he threw in a bit of food when he felt like it, and that's about all he did. They'll find him and stop him keeping an animal in the future, but nothing more than that." "I see." I reached out and stroked the dog's head, and he immediately responded by resting a paw on my wrist. There was a pathetic dignity about the way he held himself erect, the calm eyes regarding me, friendly and unafraid. "Well, you'll let me know if you want me in court." "Of course, and thank you for coming along." Halliday hesitated for a moment. "And now I expect you will want to put this poor thing out of his misery right away." I continued to run my hand over the head and ears while I thought for a moment. Yes, I suppose so. We'd never find a home for him in this state. It's the kindest thing to do. Anyway, push the door wide open, will you, so that I can get a proper look at him." In the improved light, I examined him more thoroughly. Perfect teeth, well-proportioned limbs with a fringe of yellow hair. I put my stethoscope on his chest, and as I listened to the slow, strong thudding of the heart, the dog again put his paw on my hand. I turned to Halliday. "You know, Inspector, inside this bag of bones, there's a lovely, healthy golden retriever. I wish there was some way of letting him out." As I spoke, I noticed there was more than one figure in the door opening. A pair of black pebble eyes were peering intently at the big dog from behind the inspector's broad back. The other spectators had remained in the lane, but Mrs. Donovan's curiosity had been too much for her. I continued conversationally as though I hadn't seen her. "You know, what this dog needs first of all is a good shampoo to clean up his matted coat." "Huh?" said Halliday. "Yes, and then he wants a long course of some really strong condition powders." "What's that?" The inspector looked startled. "There's no doubt about it," I said. "It's the only hope for him. But where are you going to find such things?" "Really powerful enough, I mean." I sighed and straightened up. Well, I suppose there's nothing else for it. I would better put him to sleep right away. I'll get the things for my car." When I got back to the shed, Mrs. Donovan was already inside, examining the dog despite the feeble remonstrances of the big man. Look, she said excitedly, pointing to a name roughly scratched on the collar. His name's Roy. She smiled up at me. It's a bit like Rex, isn't it? That name? You know, Mrs. Donovan, now you mention it, it is. It's very like Rex, the way it comes off your tongue. I nodded seriously. She stood silent for a few moments, obviously in the grip of a deep emotion. Then she burst out. Can I have him? I can make him better. I know I can. Please let me have him. Well, I don't know, I said. It's really up to the inspector. You'll have to get his permission. Halliday looked at her in bewilderment. Then he said, Excuse me, madam, and drew me to one side. We walked a few yards through the long grass and stopped under a tree. Mr. Herriot, he whispered, I don't know what's going on here, but I can't just pass over an animal in this condition to anybody who has a casual whim. The poor beggar's had one bad break already. I think it's enough. This woman doesn't look like a suitable person. I held up a hand. Believe me, Inspector, you have nothing to worry about. She's a funny old stick, but she's been sent from heaven today. If anybody in Darrowby can give this dog a new life, it's her. Halliday still looked very doubtful. But I still don't get it. What was all that stuff about him needing shampoos and condition powders? Oh, never mind about that. I'll tell you some other time. What he needs is lots of good grub, care and affection, and that's just what he'll get. You can take my word for it. All right, you seem very sure. Halliday looked at me for a second or two, then turned and walked over to the eager little figure by the shed. I had never before been deliberately on the lookout for Mrs. Donovan, she had just cropped up wherever I happened to be, but now I scanned the streets of Darrowby anxiously day by day without sighting her. I didn't like it when Gobber Newhouse got drunk and drove his bicycle determinedly through a barrier into a 10-foot hole where they were laying the new sewer, and Mrs. Donovan was not in evidence among the happy crowd watching. Maybe I should have called round to see how she was getting on with that dog. Certainly I had trimmed off the necrotic tissue and dressed the sores before she took him away, but perhaps he needed something more than that. And yet, at the time, I had felt a strong conviction that the main thing was to get him out of there and clean him and feed him, and nature would do the rest. And I had a lot of faith in Mrs. Donovan, far more than she had in me. When it came to animal doctoring, it was hard to believe I had been completely wrong. It must have been nearly 3 weeks, and I was on the point of calling her at home when I noticed her stumping briskly along the far side of the marketplace, peering closely into every shop window exactly as before. The only difference was that she had a big yellow dog on the end of the lead. I turned the wheel and sent my car bumping over the cobbles till I was abreast of her. When she saw me getting out, she stopped and smiled impishly, but she didn't speak as I bent over Roy and examined him. He was still a skinny dog, but he looked bright and happy. His wounds were healthy and granulating, and there was not a speck of dirt in his coat or on his skin. I knew then what Mrs. Donovan had been doing all this time. She had been washing and combing and teasing at that filthy tangle till she had finally conquered it. As I straightened up, she seized my wrist in a grip of surprising strength and looked up into my eyes. Now, Mr. Herriot, she said, haven't I made a difference to this dog? You've done wonders, Mrs. Donovan, I said. And you've been at him with that marvelous shampoo of yours, haven't you? She giggled and walked away, and from that day I saw the two of them frequently, but at a distance, and something like 2 months went by before I had a chance to talk to her again. She was passing by the surgery as I was coming down the steps, and again she grabbed my wrist. Mr. Herriot, she said, just as she had done before, haven't I made a difference to that dog? I looked down at Roy with something akin to awe. He had grown and filled out, and his coat, no longer yellow but a rich gold, lay in luxuriant shining swaths over the well-fleshed ribs and back. A new brightly studded collar glittered on his neck, and his tail, beautifully fringed, fanned the air gently. He was now a golden retriever in full magnificence. As I stared at him, he reared up, plunked his forepaws on my chest, and looked into my face, and in his eyes I read plainly the same calm affection and trust I had seen back in that black, noisome shed. Mrs. Donovan, I said softly, he's the most beautiful dog in Yorkshire. Then, because I knew she was waiting for it, it's those wonderful conditioned powders. Whatever do you put in them? Ah, wouldn't you like to know? She bridled and smiled up at me coquettishly, and indeed, she was nearer being kissed at that moment than for many years. I suppose you could say that that was the start of Roy's second life, and as the years passed, I often pondered on the beneficent providence which had decreed that an animal which had spent his first 12 months abandoned and unwanted, staring uncomprehendingly into that unchanging, stinking darkness, should be whisked in a moment into an existence of light and movement and love. because I don't think any dog had it quite so good as Roy from then on. His diet changed dramatically from odd bread crusts to bestowing steak and biscuits, meaty bones, and a bowl of warm milk every evening. And he never missed a thing. Garden fetes, school sports, evictions, gymkhanas, he would be there. I was pleased to note that as time went on, Mrs. Donovan seemed to be clocking up an ever greater daily mileage. Her expenditure on shoe leather must have been phenomenal, but of course it was absolute pie for Roy. A busy round in the morning, home for a meal, then straight out again. It was all go. Mrs. Donovan didn't confine her activities to the town centre. There was a big stretch of common land down by the river where there were seats and people used to take their dogs for a gallop, and she liked to get down there fairly regularly to check on the latest developments on the domestic scene. I often saw Roy loping majestically over the grass among a pack of assorted canines, and when he wasn't doing that, he was submitting to being stroked or patted or generally fussed over. He was handsome and he just liked people. It made him irresistible. It was common knowledge that his mistress had bought a whole selection of brushes and combs of various sizes with which she laboured over his coat. Some people said she even had a little brush for his teeth. And it might have been true, but he certainly wouldn't need his nails clipped. His life on the roads would keep them down. Mrs. Donovan too had her reward. She had a faithful companion again by her side every hour of the day and night. But there was more to it than that. She had always had the compulsion to help and heal animals, and the salvation of Roy was the high point of her life, a blazing triumph which never dimmed. I know the memory of it was always fresh, because many years later I was sitting on the sidelines at a cricket match and I saw the two of them, the old lady glancing keenly around her, Roy gazing placidly out at the field of play, apparently enjoying every ball. At the end of the match, I watched them move away with the dispersing crowd. Roy would have been about 12 then, and heaven only knows how old Mrs. Donovan must have been. But the big golden animal was trotting along effortlessly, and his mistress, a little more bent perhaps, and her head rather nearer the ground, was going very well. When she saw me, she came over, and I felt the familiar tight grip on my wrist. "Mr. Herriot," she said, and in the dark, probing eyes, the pride was still as warm, the triumph still as bursting new, as if it had all happened yesterday. "Mr. Herriot, haven't I made a difference to this dog?" Some people have been asking me why I don't read out relatively far more famous, well-known stories by famous, well-known authors, and here is my answer. I want my listeners to know what a tremendous number and variety of authors have lived and worked in this world, and what a wealth of magnificent, diverse treasure of literature they have left behind. So many listeners, I hope, would come to know for the first time that such wonderful, extraordinary writers have existed and how they have made my life so rich, so fulfilling. And I wish that some of my listeners would be able to share some of that joy with me.